I'm Sophia Walker, 29, and I never thought I'd be sitting here telling this story. 2 years ago, my world collapsed when I discovered my parents had forged my medical records, attempting to force me into being a surrogate for my infertile sister, Natasha. They thought they had the perfect plan, until they discovered I'm not the type to stay silent when wronged. Before I dive into this nightmare, if you're watching this right now, let me know where you're from in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself. Growing up in the Walker household meant one thing was always crystal clear. My older sister Natasha was the golden child, and I was the afterthought. My parents, Diana and Robert Walker, never tried to hide their favoritism. From the earliest memories of my childhood, I can recall the special treatment Natasha received. When she needed new dance shoes, they appeared instantly. When I needed art supplies for school, I was told to make do with what we had. Our family home in suburban Pennsylvania was comfortable, but the emotional atmosphere was always chilly toward me. My mother, Diana, worked as a healthcare administrator at the local hospital, a detail that would become horrifyingly relevant later. My father, Robert, ran a successful insurance agency and was known for his connections throughout the community. They were respected, well-liked, and nobody outside our home would have guessed the dysfunction that existed behind closed doors. Sophia, why can't you be more like your sister? Became the soundtrack of my childhood. Natasha excelled at everything she touched: academics, sports, social life. She was the prom queen, the valedictorian, the community volunteer. I wasn't a disappointment exactly. I got good grades and had artistic talent, but I was constantly reminded that I wasn't Natasha. Your sister never gave us this much trouble. My mother would sigh whenever I expressed an opinion that differed from theirs. The message was clear: my role was to fall in line, to make things easy, to be grateful for whatever attention they deigned to give me. Natasha wasn't deliberately cruel to me. In her way, she tried to include me in her life, but she had absorbed our parents' worldview. She genuinely believed she deserved this special treatment, and her condescending helpfulness often felt worse than outright rejection. "Let me show you how to do that properly, Sophie," she would offer, swooping in to take over whatever task I was struggling with. I both resented and craved her approval, a complicated dynamic that followed us into adulthood. When Natasha met William during her second year of college, it seemed like the perfect continuation of her charmed life. He came from a good family, was studying medicine, and our parents immediately embraced him as the son they never had. Their wedding was the social event of the season, with my parents sparing no expense. I was a bridesmaid, of course, standing in a dress I hated, watching my sister achieve yet another milestone of the perfect life our parents had always envisioned for her. I had chosen a different path. After high school, I moved 3 states away to attend art school, specializing in graphic design. The distance was deliberate. I needed space to become my own person. My parents viewed my career choice as frivolous, but I proved them wrong by building a successful freelance business that eventually led to a position at a prestigious marketing agency. My visits home became increasingly rare, limited to major holidays, and the occasional obligatory weekend. During one such visit, I noticed a change in the family dynamics. Natasha seemed subdued, and my parents were uncharacteristically attentive to her emotional state. I learned that she and William had been trying to conceive for over a year without success. This began what would become a years-long fertility struggle for my sister. She experienced 2 early miscarriages, followed by increasingly invasive fertility treatments. Each failure seemed to break something in her, and my parents channeled all their energy into supporting her through this difficult time. I sent appropriate cards and check-in texts, but maintained my emotional distance. By the time Natasha had gone through 3 failed rounds of IVF, I was living in Chicago with my boyfriend Aaron, a software developer I'd met through mutual friends. Aaron was everything I needed: supportive, kind, and completely separate from the complex dynamics of my family. He encouraged me to establish healthy boundaries with my parents, though he had never actually met them. I had deliberately kept those worlds separate. "You don't have to answer every time they call, you know," he would gently remind me when my mother's name appeared on my phone for the 5th time in a day. I was slowly learning that I deserved to prioritize my own well-being. The calls from my parents increased dramatically in frequency around the time Natasha's 4th IVF cycle failed. There were vague mentions of family obligations and being there for your sister, but nothing concrete. I deflected, made excuses about work deadlines, and tried to maintain the protective distance I had built. Family is everything, Sophia, my mother would say, her voice laden with implication. We need to be able to count on each other in times of need. I didn't realize then that these calls were laying the groundwork for what was to come. That my parents were strategizing, preparing for what they viewed as the obvious solution to Natasha's problems. That in their minds, my body was simply a resource available to the family, particularly to the daughter they truly valued. Aaron noticed my increased anxiety after these calls. You don't owe them anything, he would remind me, holding me close as I processed the complex emotions these interactions triggered. Your life is your own. I wish I had fully internalized that truth before I agreed to go home that fateful weekend in April, before I walked into the trap that had been so carefully set for me, before I discovered just how far my parents were willing to go to give Natasha everything she wanted, regardless of the cost to me. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday evening. I was working late on a project deadline when my phone lit up with my mother's number. Usually I would let it go to voicemail, but something in me said this might be important. Sophia, you need to come home this weekend, my mother said without preamble. There's a family emergency we need to discuss in person. My heart raced. Is everyone okay? Is it Dad, Natasha? Everyone's physically fine, she replied, her voice tense. But this is something we need to talk about face to face, as a family. Despite my better judgment, I rearranged my schedule and made the 5-hour drive home that Friday. Aaron offered to come with me, but I declined. It's probably just another family drama, I told him. I'll be back Sunday night. The moment I pulled into my parents' driveway, I felt the familiar weight settle onto my shoulders, that peculiar mix of obligation and resentment that characterized my relationship with my family. My mother greeted me with a brief hug, her eyes already looking past me. Natasha and William will be here for dinner, she said. Your father is picking up food from that Italian place you used to like. The stage was being set, though I didn't recognize it then. Dinner that evening was tense. My father made stilted small talk about my job, clearly uninterested in the details of my recent promotion. Natasha looked pale and drawn, while William seemed uncomfortable, barely meeting my eyes. My mother fluttered around, refilling wine glasses and urging everyone to eat more than anyone wanted. Finally, after dessert was served, my mother cleared her throat. Sophia, we asked you here because we have something important to discuss. She looked at Natasha, prompting her to continue. My sister's eyes filled with tears as she reached for William's hand. As you know, we've been trying to have a baby for years now, she began. The doctors have determined that I can't carry a pregnancy to term. My body keeps rejecting the embryos. I murmured sympathetic noises, still not understanding why this required my physical presence. We'd discussed her fertility issues over the phone numerous times. The thing is, Natasha continued, her voice cracking, we still have 3 viable embryos from our last IVF cycle, embryos that are genetically ours. My mother jumped in. What your sister needs is someone to carry those embryos for her, someone the family can trust. The silence that followed was deafening as I finally understood why I had been summoned. You want me to be a surrogate, I stated flatly, not phrasing it as a question. We wouldn't ask if there were any other options, my father said, speaking for the first time. This is Natasha's only chance to have her own biological child. I sat there stunned by the presumption. They hadn't even phrased it as a request, more as an expectation, as if my body was a family resource to be allocated where needed. I need time to think about this, I managed to say. This isn't something I can decide over dinner. Of course, sweetheart, my mother said, though her tone suggested she saw my hesitation as a mere formality. We just want you to understand how important this is to all of us. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I retreated to my old bedroom as soon as possible, calling Aaron from the safety of that space. They want you to be a surrogate, he repeated, shock evident in his voice. That's a massive ask, Sophia. I know, I whispered, afraid of being overheard. And the way they presented it, like it's just expected that I'll do this. What do you want to do? He asked the question, so simple, yet so profound. That night I barely slept, weighing all the implications. Pregnancy would mean putting my career on hold. It would mean subjecting my body to hormones, medical procedures, and all the risks that come with carrying a child. It would mean being tied to my family in an irreversible way. By morning, I had more questions than answers. At breakfast, I tried to discuss the practical aspects with my parents. Have you researched what surrogacy actually involves? The legal implications? The medical procedures? My mother waved a hand dismissively. We've looked into everything. The doctors say you're an ideal candidate since you're young and healthy. The doctors. You've already discussed this with doctors about me without me. Just preliminarily, my father said quickly. Nothing specific. Something felt off about their responses, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. The pressure continued throughout the day with subtle and not so subtle guilt trips. Your sister would do it for you, my mother said during lunch. After everything we've given you, this is your chance to give back to the family, my father added. By Sunday, I felt emotionally battered. I told them I needed more time, that I would think about it and discuss it with Aaron and my own doctor. They reluctantly agreed, though my mother's tight smile suggested she expected quick acquiescence. During the drive home, I called Aaron again, processing the weekend's events. I feel like I'm losing my mind, I told him. The way they talked about it, like my body isn't my own. What are you going to do? He asked again. After several weeks of research conversations with Aaron and one long talk with my therapist, I made my decision. Surrogacy wasn't right for me. It wasn't a choice I could make even for family. The phone call to deliver this news was one of the hardest I'd ever made. I've given this a lot of thought, I told my mother. I'm not comfortable being a surrogate. It's not something I can do. The silence on the other end lasted so long, I thought we'd been disconnected. Your sister will be devastated, she finally said, her voice cold. I thought we raised you better than this. I'm sorry she's going through this, I replied, trying to stay calm. But this isn't the right solution. We'll talk about this when you've had more time to consider what's really important, my mother said, and hung up. I sat on my couch shaking but relieved. I thought the matter was closed. I had no idea that my refusal was just the beginning, that my parents had already set in motion a plan so violating, so egregious, that it would permanently shatter our family. 2 months passed after that difficult phone call. My parents had gone conspicuously quiet. No guilt trip texts, no emotional voicemails. I was cautiously hopeful that they had accepted my decision and were pursuing other options for Natasha. Maybe they were considering adoption or looking for a surrogate outside the family. The silence was a relief, and I threw myself into my work and life with Aaron. Then on an ordinary Tuesday morning in July, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Thinking it might be a new client, I answered professionally. Hello, Ms. Walker. This is Janet from Midwest Fertility Partners. I'm calling to confirm your appointment tomorrow at 10 a.m. to begin your surrogacy preparation protocol. I nearly dropped my phone. I'm sorry, I don't have an appointment. The woman sounded confused. Are you Sophia Walker? We have you scheduled for initial blood work and medication orientation for a gestational surrogacy procedure. There must be some mistake, I insisted. I never made this appointment. Well, someone did, Janet replied. We have all your intake paperwork and medical history on file. Your initial consultation was apparently completed last month. A chill ran through me. I never had a consultation. I never signed any paperwork. After a confused back and forth, Janet suggested I come to the clinic to sort out what she called this apparent misunderstanding. I agreed, my mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. The next morning, I took a half day from work and drove to Midwest Fertility Partners. The modern glass building housed one of the most prestigious fertility clinics in the region. Inside, the reception area was designed to be soothing with soft lighting and comfortable furniture, but nothing could calm the storm brewing inside me. Janet, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, met me in a private consultation room. I pulled your entire file, she said, placing a thick folder on the desk between us. Maybe we can figure out what happened. As she opened the folder, my worst fears were confirmed. There on top was a patient information form with my name, address, and personal details. What made my blood run cold was the signature at the bottom, a reasonable approximation of my handwriting, but definitely not mine. I didn't sign this, I said, my voice shaking. Someone forged my signature. Janet's expression turned serious. Let's go through everything. Page after page revealed the elaborate deception. There were complete medical records supposedly transferred from my primary care physician, records of tests I'd never undergone, consultations that never happened. There were psychological evaluations stating I was an excellent surrogacy candidate with no red flags for potential attachment issues. Most disturbingly, there were signed consent forms for every step of the surrogacy process, each bearing that falsified version of my signature. Who authorized these records to be sent? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Janet checked the file. The request came from Diana Walker. She's listed as your emergency contact along with Robert Walker. My mother. My mother had used her position at the hospital to access my real medical records and then fabricated new ones. The realization made me physically ill. These are forgeries, I said firmly. All of them. I never agreed to be a surrogate. I explicitly told my family I would not do this. Janet's professional demeanor slipped, revealing genuine concern. Ms. Walker, what you're describing is very serious. Medical fraud is a criminal offense. I know, I whispered, the full implications hitting me. My own parents had committed identity theft and medical fraud, all to override my bodily autonomy. The clinic director was called in, and I spent the next hour explaining the situation. They were appropriately horrified, immediately flagging my file and assuring me that no procedures would move forward. They explained that they would need to conduct their own investigation, as medical fraud put their license at risk. You may want to consider reporting this to the authorities, the director advised gently. What was attempted here is not just unethical, it's illegal. I nodded numbly, collected copies of all the falsified documents, and walked out to my car. Once inside, the protective shock wore off, and I broke down completely. Sobs racked my body as I tried to process the violation. My own parents had attempted to commandeer my body to force me into 9 months of pregnancy, against my explicitly stated wishes. Through my tears, a cold clarity emerged. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't well-intentioned overstepping. This was a calculated, coordinated effort to strip me of my autonomy, to use me as nothing more than a vessel for Natasha's child. The systematic forgery of document after document showed premeditation and a complete disregard for my personhood. With shaking hands, I started my car. I wasn't going back to work. I wasn't calling Aaron yet. There was only one place I needed to go right now, to confront the people who had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. The drive to my parents' house passed in a blur of rage and disbelief. How could they do this? What was their plan, to somehow trick me into showing up for procedures I never agreed to? Did they think I wouldn't notice when someone started injecting me with hormones and implanting embryos in my uterus? The sheer audacity of their plan reflected a level of entitlement to my body that shook me to my core. As I pulled into their driveway, I saw both their cars present. Good. We were going to have this out right now, and there would be nowhere for them to hide. I didn't bother knocking. Using the key I still had from my childhood, I burst through the front door of my parents' house, the folder of falsified documents clutched in my white-knuckled grip. My mother was in the kitchen arranging flowers in a vase, the picture of suburban tranquility. She looked up, startled by my sudden entrance. Sophia, what are you doing here? Why aren't you at work? Why am I not at the fertility clinic, you mean? I countered, my voice trembling with fury. Getting prepped for the surrogacy I explicitly told you I wanted no part of. The color drained from her face. My father appeared in the doorway, alerted by the commotion. What's going on? He asked, though his guarded expression told me he already knew. I slapped the folder down on the kitchen island. This is what's going on: forged medical records, falsified consent forms, my signature counterfeited on legal documents. Ring any bells? My mother's hand fluttered to her throat. Sophia, you need to calm down and let us explain. Explain what? How you committed identity theft, how you used your hospital connections to access and fabricate my medical history. Please enlighten me. My father stepped forward, assuming the authoritative tone he'd used throughout my childhood when laying down rules. You were being stubborn and short-sighted. We knew you'd come around eventually. This just expedited the process. His casual admission, devoid of remorse, staggered me. You knew I'd come around based on what I told you, no, clearly and unequivocally. For goodness sake, Sophia, my mother interjected. It's just 9 months of your life. For your sister, for family. Just 9 months. Just my bodily autonomy. Just the risk to my health, my career, my future. My voice rose with each question. You don't get to decide that for me. Nobody does. The sound of the front door opening interrupted our confrontation. Natasha walked in freezing when she saw me. The guilty flash in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. You knew, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You knew what they were doing. She couldn't hold my gaze. They said they would handle everything. That you were on board, but just being difficult about the paperwork. And you believed that, or did it just conveniently align with what you wanted to hear? The betrayal from my sister cut almost as deeply as from my parents. Did you ever for 1 second consider asking me directly? Tears welled in Natasha's eyes. You don't understand how desperate we are, how much we've lost, how much we've suffered. So your suffering justifies violating me, makes it okay to forge my signature, and attempt to use my body without consent. My father stepped between us. That's enough, Sophia. You're being melodramatic. No procedures were performed. No harm was done. No harm, I laughed bitterly. You've destroyed our family. You've shattered any trust I ever had in you. And you've broken multiple laws in the process. My mother's expression hardened. No one would have known if you hadn't made such a scene at the clinic. We were trying to help everyone get what they need. Natasha needs a child. You need to contribute something meaningful to this family for once. Her words hit like physical blows. In her mind, nothing I had ever done, not my career, not my independence, not my individual personhood, counted as meaningful unless it served their preferred daughter. Did you tell the entire family I agreed to this? I asked, suddenly remembering the clinic's mention of family medical history. The silence confirmed my suspicion. Unbelievable. You've been telling everyone I joyfully agreed to be Natasha's surrogate, haven't you? Creating this narrative where I'm finally doing something worthwhile. We told them you were helping your sister, my father admitted. The details aren't anyone else's business. The details being that it's all a lie, I shot back. The front door opened again, and William, Natasha's husband, walked in. He took in the scene with confusion. What's happening, Sophia? I didn't know you were visiting. I'm not visiting. I'm confronting my family about forging my medical records to force me into being a surrogate for you and Natasha. William's jaw dropped. What are you talking about? The genuine shock on his face told me he hadn't been part of the conspiracy. At least someone in this family had boundaries. You didn't know? I asked him directly. He turned to Natasha, who couldn't meet his eyes. Is this true? Did you try to trick your sister into being our surrogate? It wasn't like that, she whispered. Mom and Dad said they could convince her. By committing fraud? William looked horrified. By falsifying medical documents, Natasha, that's a crime. You don't understand, my mother interjected. We're family. We do what needs to be done for each other. No, I said firmly. Family doesn't manipulate, coerce, or violate each other. Family respects boundaries and choices. William moved to stand beside me, a gesture of solidarity that surprised everyone in the room. She's right. This is wrong on every level. My father's face darkened with anger. Think about what you're doing, Sophia. Think about the family's reputation. If you make this public, it will damage all of us. The threat was implicit but clear. Keep quiet or face consequences. But something had broken loose in me, some final thread of obligation or fear that had kept me tethered to their manipulations. I am thinking about it. I'm thinking about every young woman who gets pressured into using her body in ways she doesn't consent to. I'm thinking about the precedent it sets if I let this slide. You ungrateful child, my mother hissed. After everything we've done for you. What you've done for me, I laughed incredulously. You mean the lifetime of making me feel second best? Or the recent attempt to use my body as an incubator without my consent? Which part should I be grateful for exactly? Natasha stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. Sophia, please, we can work this out, as a family. But looking at her, I no longer saw my sister. I saw a woman so fixated on her own desires that she was willing to be complicit in violating someone else to achieve them. even if that someone was her own sister. "We're not a family right now," I said quietly. "We're perpetrators and a victim, and I won't be your victim anymore." I gathered the folder of evidence and walked toward the door, pausing only to address William. "I don't blame you for this, but you might want to consider what kind of family you've married into." My father called after me, his voice a mixture of anger and panic. "If you walk out that door and pursue this, you'll destroy this family. Is that what you want?" I turned back one last time. "You destroyed this family the moment you decided my body wasn't my own. I'm just making sure everyone knows it." As I drove away, tears blurred my vision, but my resolve had never been clearer. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up against a fundamental wrong, especially when, the perpetrators were the people who were supposed to love you most. The drive home from my parents' house was a blur of tears and rage. My phone kept buzzing with calls from my mother, but I ignored them all. When I finally reached my apartment, I collapsed on the couch, emotionally drained. Aaron found me there when he returned from work, still clutching the folder of forged documents. "Sophia, what happened?" His concern was immediate as he took in my tear-streaked face. Through broken sobs, I told him everything. The fertility clinic call, the discovered forgeries, the confrontation with my family. With each detail, his expression shifted from shock to horror to a quiet, simmering anger. "This is criminal," he said, finally paging through the documents. "You know that, right? This isn't just a family disagreement. They committed identity theft, medical fraud. Who knows what else?" "I know," I whispered. "I just can't believe they would go this far." Aaron sat beside me, taking my hands in his. "What do you want to do?" It was the same question he'd asked when I first told him about my family's surrogacy request. But now the stakes were infinitely higher. This wasn't about declining a request anymore. It was about responding to a violation. I need to talk to a lawyer, I decided, not just to protect myself, but to understand what legal options I have. The next morning, I called in sick to work and made an appointment with Patricia Sanderson, an attorney specializing in medical law. Her office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, both welcoming and professional. After reviewing the documents I'd brought, her face was grave. "Ms. Walker, what your family attempted to do is extremely serious," she explained. "Forgery of medical records is not only a civil offense, but a criminal one. There are potentially multiple violations here: identity theft, forgery, medical fraud, even attempted reproductive coercion." "What are my options?" I asked, still numb from the reality of the situation. "You could file a police report, which would likely trigger a criminal investigation. Your mother in particular may face professional consequences given her role in healthcare. Alternatively, you could pursue civil action against your family members." "And if I do nothing?" Patricia's expression softened slightly. "That's your right, but I would strongly recommend at minimum filing a formal complaint with the fertility clinic and ensuring there's documentation of what happened. Even if you choose not to press charges now, you may want that record if issues arise in the future." I left her office with a clearer understanding of the legal landscape, but even more turmoil in my heart. The thought of my parents facing criminal charges was overwhelming, yet so was the magnitude of their betrayal. I spent the next few days in a fog discussing options with Aaron and trying to process my emotions. Meanwhile, my parents launched their counteroffensive. My phone filled with voicemails, first angry, then pleading, and finally threatening. "Think about what this will do to the family," my father warned in one message. "Think about your sister's pain." Then came the flying monkeys. Aunts, uncles, cousins. Suddenly, everyone in the extended family was calling to tell me I needed to work things out and not be so dramatic. It became clear that my parents had launched a smear campaign, telling a carefully edited version of events where I was the villain, reneging on a promise to help my poor infertile sister. "Your sister has been through so much," my Aunt Susan chided. "Can't you find it in your heart to help her?" "Did my parents tell you they forged my medical records?" I countered. "That they committed identity theft?" The pause told me everything. "Well, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding." After the fifth such call, I turned off my phone. The isolation was profound. My entire family system had mobilized against me, pressuring me to sweep criminal behavior under the rug in the name of family harmony. Only Aaron remained steadfast. "This is gaslighting on an industrial scale," he said one evening as we discussed the latest family message. "They're trying to make you doubt the reality of what happened." His unwavering support gave me the courage for what came next. After a week of reflection, I made two decisions. First, I would file a formal complaint with the authorities. The thought of my mother potentially losing her job or my parents facing charges was painful. But the alternative, allowing such a violation to go unchallenged, was worse. Second, I would take control of the narrative. My parents had been spreading their version of events. It was time for me to tell the truth. I sat down at my computer and began typing a social media post. It was measured but unflinching, detailing exactly what had happened without embellishment or accusation. I named names. I described the forgeries. I explained my repeated refusal to be a surrogate and how my family had attempted to override my bodily autonomy. "I'm sharing this not to hurt my family," I wrote, "but because I know I can't be the only person who has faced reproductive coercion from loved ones. We need to be able to talk about these violations even when they come from people we care about, especially then." My finger hovered over the post button for a long moment. This was a Rubicon. Once crossed, there would be no going back to the pretense of a normal family. But perhaps that pretense had always been a lie. I clicked post and closed my laptop. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Friends expressed shock and support. Acquaintances shared their own stories of family pressure around reproduction. My post was shared hundreds, then thousands of times. Within days, I began receiving messages from women across the country who had faced similar situations, family members who felt entitled to their reproductive capabilities, who had used manipulation guilt or outright deception to try to control their bodies. "I thought I was alone," one woman wrote. "My mother-in-law tried to tamper with my birth control because she wanted grandchildren. My parents tried to talk doctors into harvesting my eggs without my full knowledge when I was hospitalized." Shared another. "The solidarity was both healing and heartbreaking. I wasn't alone in this experience, but the fact that so many others had faced similar violations was deeply disturbing." Then came the media interest. A reporter from a local news site reached out asking to interview me about reproductive coercion within families. After discussing it with Aaron and my lawyer, I agreed. The story needed to be told, and I was in a position to tell it. The article titled, "When Family Crosses the Line, Woman's Parents Forge Medical Records for Forced Surrogacy," was published online a week later. It was factual, balanced, and devastating. Within days, it was picked up by larger outlets. I began receiving interview requests from national publications and television programs. My parents' reaction was swift. Their attorney sent a cease and desist letter claiming defamation. Patricia, my lawyer, responded with the evidence folder, copies of the forged documents, recordings of voicemails where my parents essentially admitted what they'd done, statements from the fertility clinic staff. The defamation threat quickly evaporated. Instead, my parents filed a lawsuit claiming I had maliciously damaged the family's reputation and was causing intentional emotional distress to my sister. Patricia assured me the case had no merit and would likely be dismissed, but the fact that they were doubling down rather than acknowledging their wrongdoing cut deeply. While the legal battles were brewing, something unexpected happened. The fertility clinic where the forgeries had been submitted reached out to me. Their internal investigation had revealed significant weaknesses in their verification procedures. They were implementing new protocols to prevent similar fraud in the future and wanted my input as part of a patient advisory group on consent issues. "Your experience, as terrible as it was, has highlighted vulnerabilities in the system," the clinic director explained. "We want to ensure this never happens to anyone else." It was a small victory, but meaningful. If other women were protected from similar violations because of what I'd been through, then some good would come from this nightmare. Meanwhile, the criminal investigation into my parents' actions had begun. My mother was placed on administrative leave from her hospital position pending the outcome. The family smear campaign intensified, with relatives I barely knew posting on social media about how I was destroying lives out of spite. Through it all, I held on to the truth of what had happened and the right to defend my own bodily autonomy. What had started as a personal battle for respect within my family had evolved into something larger, a public stand against reproductive coercion in all its forms. One evening, as Aaron and I were discussing the latest developments, my doorbell rang. To my shock, Natasha's husband William stood in the hallway. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. "Just us." I hesitated, surprised by William's unexpected appearance at my door. Aaron gave me a questioning look, ready to ask him to leave if I wanted. After a moment's consideration, I nodded. "It's okay," I told Aaron. "Give us a few minutes." Once Aaron had retreated to the bedroom, I invited William in, motioning toward the living room couch. He sat awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable. "I left Natasha," he said without preamble. "I filed for divorce last week." This was the last thing I'd expected to hear. "Because of this situation." William ran a hand through his hair, looking exhausted. "Yes and no. The surrogacy scheme was the breaking point, but there have been other issues, other deceptions I wasn't aware of until now." "What do you mean?" "When I confronted Natasha after your visit, she finally admitted she'd known about the forgeries from the beginning. It wasn't your parents' idea. It was hers." His voice cracked. "She was the one who suggested using your medical records, who planned how to get your signature copied." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I'd assumed my parents were the masterminds with Natasha as a passive participant. Learning she had orchestrated the violation made the betrayal even more profound. "There's more," William continued. "Remember when we were told the last round of IVF failed? It didn't. Natasha was pregnant, but she had an early miscarriage. She never told me because she was afraid I'd want to stop trying. She's been lying to me about medications, procedures, everything." I sat in stunned silence. The sister I thought I knew had disappeared entirely, replaced by someone capable of elaborate deceptions against both her husband and her sister. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you more," William said gently, "but I thought you deserved to know the full truth. And I wanted to apologize for any part I played, even unknowingly." "You have nothing to apologize for," I assured him. "You were deceived too." After William left, I sat in the dark living room processing this new information. Aaron joined me, offering silent comfort as I explained what I'd learned. "I don't even recognize my own family anymore," I whispered. The news of Natasha and William's impending divorce reached my parents before I could process my own feelings about it. My mother called, leaving a venomous voicemail blaming me for destroying your sister's marriage on top of denying her a child. My father's message was worse, cold, calculating threats about what would happen if I continued my campaign of family destruction. Their reaction only reinforced my resolve. The criminal investigation was proceeding, with detectives now interviewing hospital staff about how my mother had accessed and altered records. The fertility clinic had implemented new verification procedures directly resulting from my case, and my social media posts had sparked a national conversation about reproductive coercion within families. None of this made the pain easier to bear. I began seeing a therapist, Dr. Kayla Jenkins, who specialized in family trauma. During our sessions, I grappled with the complex emotions of standing up to abusive family members while mourning the relationships I thought I had. "I feel guilty sometimes," I admitted during one session. "Like I'm overreacting. They didn't actually succeed in making me go through with the surrogacy." "The attempt itself was the violation," Dr. Jenkins reminded me. "And their response, blaming you, threatening you, mobilizing others against you, shows they still don't recognize your bodily autonomy as sacred and inviolable." Slowly, painfully, I began to understand that what I'd experienced was part of a lifelong pattern, not an isolated incident. My family had always treated me as secondary, my needs and boundaries less important than Natasha's desires. The surrogacy scheme was simply the most extreme manifestation of a dynamic that had shaped our entire relationship. 3 months after I discovered the forgeries, formal charges were filed against my mother for medical fraud and identity theft. The prosecutor had decided there was sufficient evidence to proceed with a criminal case. My father faced lesser charges as an accessory. Natasha, despite her role in planning the deception, avoided criminal charges due to insufficient evidence of her direct involvement in the forgeries. The day I was scheduled to testify at the preliminary hearing was one of the hardest of my life. Walking into the courthouse knowing I would have to publicly detail how my own family had conspired against me felt surreal. Aaron held my hand tightly as we navigated through reporters who had gathered outside. In the stark fluorescent lighting of the courtroom, I saw my parents for the first time since our confrontation. My mother looked smaller somehow, her usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled. My father sat rigidly beside her, his face an expressionless mask. Neither would meet my eyes. When I took the stand, I focused on Patricia, my attorney, who nodded encouragingly as I was sworn in. I testified calmly about discovering the forged documents, about my explicit refusal to be a surrogate, about the pattern of disregard for my autonomy. I didn't embellish or accuse. I simply stated the facts as I knew them. During cross-examination, my parents' attorney tried to paint the situation as a simple misunderstanding, a well-intentioned effort that went awry. "Isn't it true that your parents simply wanted to help your sister have a child?" he asked. "They wanted to use my body without my consent," I corrected. There was nothing simple or well-intentioned about forgery and fraud. By the time I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt drained, but strangely empowered. I had spoken my truth not with anger or vengeance, but with the simple clarity of someone who knew her boundaries had been violated and refused to remain silent about it. The judge found sufficient evidence to proceed to trial, but something unexpected happened before that could occur. My parents' attorney approached Patricia about a plea deal. My mother would plead guilty to reduced charges of attempted medical fraud, facing probation and community service rather than jail time, and would surrender her medical administration credentials. My father would plead to a misdemeanor with similar penalties. Patricia explained that this was a reasonable outcome given the circumstances. "Criminal cases are about punishment and deterrence," she said. "The question is what outcome would best serve justice here?" After much reflection, I agreed to the plea arrangement. I didn't want my parents to go to prison. I wanted them to acknowledge what they had done, and for there to be consequences that reflected the seriousness of their actions. The plea deal accomplished both. On the day of the sentencing, I delivered a victim impact statement. Standing before the court, I looked directly at my parents for the first time in months. "What hurts most isn't the forgery or the fraud," I told them. "It's that you never saw me as a person with the right to make decisions about my own body. I was always just a means to an end, a resource to be used for someone else's benefit. That's not love. That's not family." My mother wept silently. My father stared straight ahead. Neither spoke when given the opportunity to address the court. As they left the courthouse surrounded by family members who had supported them throughout, I felt a strange emptiness. The legal battle was essentially over, but the emotional wounds remained raw and open. There was no satisfaction in watching my parents face consequences, only a profound sadness that it had come to this. Aaron wrapped an arm around me as we walked to our car. "How do you feel?" he asked gently. "Like I've lost and won at the same time." I answered honestly, "Like nothing will ever be the same, and maybe that's necessary." The truth was, in standing up for myself, I had lost my family as I knew it. But I had gained something perhaps more valuable, a deep understanding of my own worth and the courage to defend it even against those I had been taught to obey and appease. It was a painful trade, but one I would make again in a heartbeat. As we drove away from the courthouse, away from the wreckage of what once had been my family, I felt the first tentative stirrings of something new. Not happiness exactly, but a quiet certainty that I had done what was right not just for myself, but for anyone who had ever been pressured to surrender their bodily autonomy in the name of family obligation. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be more therapy sessions, more difficult conversations, more moments of doubt and grief. But for the first time since this ordeal began, I could also see the possibility of healing, of building a life defined by respect and genuine love, rather than manipulation and control. Sometimes I reflected the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to say no to those who would use you. And sometimes the hardest battles are the ones most worth fighting. In the months following my parents' sentencing, I entered what my therapist called the rebuilding phase. The legal drama had concluded, but the emotional aftermath continued to unfold in unexpected ways. My relationship with Aaron deepened through the crisis. He had seen me at my most vulnerable, had witnessed the ugly dynamics of my family of origin, and had stood by me without wavering. 6 months after the court case ended, he proposed during a weekend trip to Lake Michigan. We decided on a small wedding surrounded only by chosen family, friends who had supported us, and a few distant relatives who had reached out with genuine compassion during the ordeal. "I don't want anyone there who doesn't fully respect your autonomy," Aaron said as we planned the guest list. It was a simple statement, but it reflected how profoundly our understanding of family had evolved. Dr. Jenkins, my therapist, helped me navigate the complex grief of family estrangement. "You're mourning both the family you lost and the family you never actually had," she explained during one session. "The parents who would respect your bodily autonomy, the sister who would put your well-being above her desires. These weren't the family members you grew up with." This framework helped me process my conflicting emotions. I could acknowledge the pain of separation, while recognizing that the relationships I mourned had been fundamentally unhealthy. The most surprising development came 3 months after the sentencing when I received an email from Natasha. She had moved to another state after her divorce from William was finalized and had been in therapy herself. "I don't expect forgiveness," she wrote. "What I did was unforgivable. But I want you to know I'm working to understand why I was willing to violate you that way, to recognize how wrong it was, and to ensure I never treat anyone that way again." We exchanged occasional emails after that, cautious, careful communications that acknowledged the immense breach of trust between us, while leaving a small door open to the possibility of some form of relationship in the distant future. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a kind of peace. My parents made no such overtures. After completing their community service, they moved to Florida, apparently unable to face the social consequences of their actions in our hometown. Mutual acquaintances reported they had joined a new church and were starting fresh, though whether that included any genuine reflection on their behavior remained unknown. Professionally, I channeled my experience into advocacy. The fertility clinic that had been targeted in the fraud scheme invited me to join their patient advisory board, where I helped develop stronger consent protocols and educational materials about bodily autonomy in reproductive health care. I began speaking at medical ethics conferences about reproductive coercion and the importance of rigorous verification procedures. Through this work, I connected with other survivors of family-based reproductive coercion. Women whose relatives had tampered with birth control, pressured them into unwanted pregnancies, or like me attempted to use their bodies as surrogates without full consent. We formed an online support group that eventually evolved into a formal nonprofit organization, Autonomy Alliance. "What happened to me was extreme," I often said in my presentations, but the underlying dynamic, treating women's bodies as family resources rather than sovereign entities, is disturbingly common. The most healing aspect of this advocacy was watching institutional practices change in response to our stories. Fertility clinics across the country began implementing stricter verification procedures, including video confirmations of consent and private screenings for coercion. Medical schools added curriculum components about identifying and preventing reproductive coercion. Slowly, the medical establishment was acknowledging its role as a potential safeguard against these violations. On a personal level, the most profound healing came through rebuilding my sense of safety and trust. For months after discovering the forgeries, I had experienced nightmares, panic attacks, and a pervasive feeling of vulnerability. Simple activities like visiting a doctor became fraught with anxiety. What if someone else tried to make decisions about my body? Dr. Jenkins worked with me on grounding techniques and boundary reinforcement. "Your body is yours" became a daily affirmation. You alone decide what happens to it. Aaron helped by consistently demonstrating respect for my boundaries, asking permission before even simple physical contact during my most triggered periods. "I want you to never doubt that you have full control over your own body," he explained, "not just in theory, but in everyday practice." Gradually, the acute trauma responses subsided. I began to feel secure in my autonomy again, to trust that my explicit no would be respected. The hypervigilance faded, replaced by a calm certainty in my right to self-determination. 1 year after the court case concluded, I received an unexpected letter. It was from a young woman named Jaime, who had been a surrogate for her sister. Willingly, she emphasized, but under circumstances that had left her feeling used and discarded afterward. "Your story helped me understand why I feel so conflicted," she wrote. "Even though I agreed to the surrogacy the way my family treated me during and after, like an incubator rather than a person with my own needs and feelings, was wrong. You gave me the vocabulary to express that violation." Messages like Jamie's reinforced my conviction that speaking out had been necessary not just for my own healing, but for others navigating similar terrain. The violation I had experienced, while deeply personal, reflected broader societal issues around women's bodily autonomy and family entitlement. 2 years after discovering the forged documents, I found myself in a place I couldn't have imagined during those dark early days. I was married to a partner who embodied respect for boundaries. I had built a community of friends who understood the complexity of family estrangement. My advocacy work was making tangible changes in medical practices. The loss of my family of origin remained painful. There were still holidays that felt empty milestones that triggered grief. But alongside that grief grew a profound appreciation for the family I was building, one founded on mutual respect rather than obligation, on love that enhanced rather than diminished personhood. In therapy, I had worked through the guilt that initially plagued me, the feeling that by refusing to be a surrogate, by pressing charges against my parents, I had somehow failed as a daughter and sister. I came to understand that the failure lay in their inability to see me as a full human being, with the right to my own body and choices. The fundamental lesson I told a group of medical students during a guest lecture is that love without respect isn't really love at all. True love honors boundaries. It sees the other person's autonomy as sacred. Anything less is just another form of control. This understanding transformed how I approached all my relationships. I became more intentional about expressing my needs, more attentive to others' boundaries, more committed to creating connections based on mutual respect, rather than expectation or obligation. The journey from victim to advocate wasn't linear. There were still days when anger overwhelmed me, when the magnitude of my family's betrayal felt fresh and raw. There were moments when I questioned everything, whether I should have pressed charges, whether public exposure had been necessary, whether reconciliation might have been possible with a different approach. But through it all, one truth remained constant. I had the right to determine what happened to my own body. No family obligation, no sister's need, no parent's expectation superseded that fundamental right. In standing firm on this principle, I had lost the family I was born into. But I had gained something more precious, the knowledge that I would never again allow anyone to treat me as less than sovereign over my own existence. And in sharing my story, I had helped others claim that same sovereignty for themselves. Sometimes, I wrote in the final chapter of the memoir I eventually published, the most important family is the one you create after recognizing that the one you were born into cannot give you what you need. Sometimes healing means building something new rather than repairing what was broken. And sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is simply saying no to those who would use you even when, especially when, they claim to love you. This was the lesson I carried forward, the truth I had paid such a high price to learn. My body was my own. My life was my own. And no one, regardless of biological connection or emotional claim, had the right to decide otherwise. I hope my story has resonated with you in some way. If you've ever struggled with family pressure or had your boundaries violated, know that you're not alone. Your body is yours, your choices are yours, and you deserve relationships that honor your autonomy. If this story meant something to you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of standing up for yourself. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? Share your experience in the comments below. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the family we create is more healing than the one we were born into.